Hi, this is Scott. I really appreciate our sponsors because they make the show possible. Today's show is sponsored by Developer Express. Become a UI superhero with Dev Express controls and libraries. Deliver elegant .NET solutions that address customer needs today by leveraging your existing knowledge. You can build next-generation touch-enabled solutions for tomorrow. You can download your free 30-day trial at dx.hanselminutes.com. That's dx.hanselminutes.com.
From hanselminutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 484. In this episode, Scott talks with Kishau Rogers about systems thinking.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. And today I'm talking with Kishau Rogers. She's the CEO and founder of the Websmith Group, a web development company. Thanks for chatting with me today.
Thanks for having me, Scott. I appreciate it.
No problem. So we were talking a little bit earlier just to kind of prep for the show. And the topic for today is about, do people need to learn to code, this learn to code movement, or is this the wrong way to go about things? And I think you've got some really great opinions about this.
Yes, definitely. Here at Websmith Group, we have what we call a student innovation program, and we do quite a bit of work with students that are entering the technology industry. And what I found is two issues that I'm seeing. A lot of them know how to code. Where I'm seeing some challenges is in how they think. So we like to call it systems-based thinking. We spend a lot of time thinking and less time coding, because we're seeing people write great code for the wrong reasons, or they're writing too much code and it results in bloated code and systems that you must maintain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when we think about a system, it's one of those words that's just so vague that there's a certain level of maturity, whether it be emotional maturity or age, or, you have to go through a certain amount of school. I tried it on my 7-year-old. I tried it on my 9-year-old. I tried it on my nephew who's 15. It wasn't until I got to my 20-year-old niece that concept of like, there are systems and systems have complexity and workflow, that she was able to kind of grasp that.
Yes. Systems is, it's such a big word and a lot of times it's used in different ways. So when we say systems, we're thinking about an interconnected set of, methods or procedures, that work together to accomplish a goal. So that's what we mean by systems, and having coders think, more broad in their code and how it fits into a bigger, larger system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It seems also that, at least I have felt that, the concept of layers of abstraction and the idea that we're standing on the shoulders of giants has been, I believe, largely forgotten with this learn to code movement. We're teaching all these people how to do a for loop, but they don't really understand how the computer works.
Yes. We're finding a lot of those, particularly, I love attending the hackathons. I think it's great practice. It keeps people on their toes. But a lot of what I'm seeing, people are using, conditional statements, for loops, arrays, in ways that are not needed. But there's no time for them to really think through it. And so I'd like to see more attention paid to thinking through an issue. And then you have to have a great vocabulary for code to determine if a conditional statement or a loop or some of these other methods are appropriate for the problem that you're trying to solve.
Right. Mm-hmm. I find that some of the best interview questions aren't the ones that are asking about the detailed aspects of a language, but are things like, when you type google.com in a browser, describe what happens.
Yes. That's a lot of that is lost, particularly in the web industry, because there's so many layers to running a web or mobile application. We have name servers, domain registrars. There's so many players that play in that space that can affect your web application. And I'm finding a lot where people are focused on their piece of the equation, and where you find the challenge is when things start to break. And that's when you understand that people don't understand how things work. When something breaks and you can't work your way out of it. If it's not your code, then how do you troubleshoot it? How do you know if it's the domain name? It could be the server. It could be, host headers. It could be a lot of different things that could be wrong. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The analogy that I've used a lot with success was that I was fortunate enough when I bought my first car. It was a $300 car that my dad wouldn't let me drive it because it was an automatic.
Okay.
He didn't believe two things. He said, if you're going to have a car, even this $300 crap car, you need to be able to drive a manual stick shift because that's important to know the system. Yeah. And I won't let you drive a car until you've changed the oil once.
Yes. And it's important, and using that analogy, and thinking about code, I think it's important for, any code or any programmer to deploy their solution. So, if they're coding it, then they should deploy it so that they understand how things work. At least from that perspective of deployment, you learn a lot of that in deploying an application. Right.
The idea of being the DevOps person as opposed to just throwing the code over the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always felt that people should actually have a system that they care about that isn't mission critical, but it really ought to be up 24 hours. So I've recommended, at least in the past, that you try to write a blog.
Yes.
Don't write WordPress, but write something basic and try to keep it up.
Keep it up and running. And you'll be surprised how much you have to learn in that process. You're going to, and depending on the complexity of the blog, you learn about IP addresses, domain name, you're dealing with the server administrators, and there's so much that's involved in keeping a blog up and running.
So one of the things that I appreciated about your perspective on this is that this idea of patterns of behaviors, of evolution of things over time, it seems like a lot of people don't think about how processes and systems evolve over time.
Yes. One of the biggest lessons that I've had in my experience as a developer, I've been in the industry about 20 years, and I would say that one of the bigger mistakes, we've all made mistakes, was in working on a project where, I was simply asked to code, let's say a timesheet form, and, just keeping in that silo. What I've learned was that form was actually being used to populate a payroll system, which is a mission critical system, and there's some questions that I didn't ask. So this was like 15 years ago. And so in thinking about systems-based thinking, it's really important to really think about the bigger picture and how things evolve and why you're being asked to develop the solution that you're asking. Who are the players that are going to use it? How does it impact other systems around it?
Right. Those things might change the way you're going to do validation of your data.
Exactly.
How important it is that your data is clean.
Yes. Data must be clean. Any system that you're interacting with, also, it's important that those systems have validation checks and balances as well. So these are some conversations that we often don't have, because people often work in silos, and you're kind of thinking about your piece of the puzzle. And that's, one of the challenges in writing code. It comes in the back end, in maintaining and supporting the code. You learn that you didn't ask the question. And so there's a bottleneck or something that isn't working as well as it should.
It seems like in really complicated systems where I would not expect to see silos, I see them. For example, I use Toyota. They're local. I have a Toyota. So when I go get the car oil fixed, I am shocked at how many systems do what I call on the glass integration. Where they have two systems and they use the clipboard to integrate those systems. Like, you see this time and time again.
Yes. Yeah, you see it over. I mean, you can see it over and over. There's systems that are, and it's popular in retail. I see it a lot in retail spaces. And again, that's another example of when systems are developed in silos, they often don't work very seamlessly, because you have to take a step back and look at not just the systems themselves, but the connections between the systems so that everything works very seamlessly.
Right. And it seems like people just, in those cases, just didn't think about it.
You just don't think about it.
Yeah. Some chief architect didn't exist.
Yeah. I mean, and it happens, and it's very easy. As you evolve systems over time, a lot of times decisions are made, business rules, and you kind of just hack away at the code over time. And what ends up happening is you have bloated code, there are business rules embedded in the code. And as people come and go in organizations, as teams come and go, you have these parts of code that don't function very well that you never learn about until something breaks. And then you realize, okay, this no longer fits. So this is not like a one-time approach that you would use at the beginning of the project. This is something that should be ongoing.
Yeah. I would think, though, that some people, perhaps people who are listening to this show, might feel that they are just a cog in the machine. They may not be the chief architect. So while they know they are in a silo and that they know that they are building a thing that flows into another thing, they may feel they have no control over that, and they may not be able to get involved and make it better at a larger scope, because that's simply not their scope.
It's not their scope. And I think in a lot of larger organizations, it's pretty easy to be able to say that, I have no control over it. But my philosophy is that, in terms of programming, the job is not to code. The job is to think. And so it doesn't require a lot to ask questions about things that are going to impact whatever it is that you've been assigned to work on. I think everyone should take responsibility for knowing how your slice of code is impacted in the organization and how it impacts other systems around it, so that you can write better code. And even the solution may not even require writing more code, and that should always be an option as well.
Yeah, I always like to be able to refactor via subtraction. So one of the things that I'm struggling with my kids is for them to think about things that they interact with as part of a larger system. And one of the jokes I was making actually this morning with the kids was they wanted toast for breakfast. So I threatened to make them take the toaster apart and put it back together before I would make any toast for them, because from their perspective, the toaster is magic.
Yeah, everything's magic. And thinking about, how we deal with clients, customers, and colleagues, it all seems like magic. You go off, you write code, and you come back, and we hear the word push buttons a lot. You kind of push buttons, and it's really important to understand how things work and why they work the way they work. I speak to my daughter a lot about like Minecraft. She uses Minecraft a lot and plays games, and we talk a lot about how those games were developed. And what I've learned is that the more she's interested in how things were developed and how they evolved, she becomes more interested in learning those things herself. So those are some of the things that I think are also appealing to potential technologists that we're not really focusing on. I find that a lot of the coding activities are very mundane, hello world, things that don't interest them at all. And I think that we could tackle some real world issues in doing some of these activities. And I feel like they would be a lot more interested in using coding as a tool to develop solutions.
Right. I feel if people had a view of how their silo fit into a larger system, they would look at systems like, if this, then that, like IFTTT,
yes.
And say, I like Instagram and I like Facebook. Maybe I can grab, if I post to Instagram, then put the file in Dropbox and stick it in. But it seems like there's a mindset that's immediately intuitive to. Yeah. And then there is the person that isn't intuitive to, and I'm trying to figure out how to make it intuitive to everybody.
Yeah. I think it should be taught. It's something that I feel that should be taught in schools. There's so many opportunities to teach that type of thinking in schools, even in managing homework schedules, and how you, return your homework to teachers. If I do this by this date, then I need to do this next, and this happens. So I think, we could teach that in how our kids manage. Our kids have their own schedules as well. And when things happen, there are consequences to those things. So there are tons of opportunities to use the if then, else, types of thinking in dealing with children.
Yeah, it does seem like I'm making this probably is a thing already, but I was going to make up this idea of consequential thinking. Like I'm still trying to get it across to my children. Like, they are young, they're 7 and 9, but it's like, if you do this, this is going to happen. And then 5 minutes later, they do it anyway. I was like, I just literally told you this was going to happen. And there's a maturity, there's a pop that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Well, some of it also, I find, another thing that's missing is giving people permission to break things or to fail. Some of teaching consequences is allowing someone to actually fail so that they can see the impact of that consequence. And the same thing applies to software development. There are very few spaces where people can just fail and that you give people permission to fail and to break things and to take things apart and to see how things work when you don't use best practices. For example, performance, writing bloated code and the performance over time, you often don't have an opportunity to see how that impacts a larger system until it's in production.
That's a very, very valid point. I think that probably feeds why people we hear a lot about imposter syndrome and people feeling like they are in over their heads.
Yes.
Because, you do your degree or you do your code camp and you get a job and now the pressure's on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you don't really have a flexible, open-minded approach to go and execute solutions. But I know that you believe that people should have that flexible approach.
They should. And that's how some people learn best, actually. Some people learn best just by doing. And then they learn from their mistakes. And it sticks, more so than it does when you kind of teach them and lecture them and they take notes. And, a person could academically know best practices, but not understand why they are best practices. So some people learn better just by doing and failing. And so creating spaces and, of course you wouldn't do this on mission critical projects or revenue generating projects, but creating spaces for people to actually, play around, break things and test their theories out to see why the best practices are the way they are.
I want to take a brief moment to thank my sponsors, Syncfusion, this week. The first and only complete Hadoop distribution designed for Windows is now available from Syncfusion. You can literally deploy a production-ready big data cluster in minutes. This revolutionary big data platform will not only change the way that you approach big data, but it is 100% free for everyone, with free commercial support for Syncfusion Plus members. Learn more at syncfusion.com/bigdata. I think that being able to have that 20% time or that Friday hackathon where you can, make a chat program for the office.
Yes, exactly.
That might someday be mission critical, but right now we're just playing.
We're just playing around, yeah. And we're actually doing a hackathon here next Tuesday, on an idea that we had in a meeting. And, with our schedule, we really didn't have any time during the business day. And so we just decided to carve out some time before the holiday, to do a hackathon. And everyone's looking forward to it because they rarely get a chance to do that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And you're doing that like as the CEO, as a founder, like this is important. So this is an organizational value that we think it needs to happen.
Exactly. It's very important. I'm actually participating in it. I don't often get a chance to touch the code these days. So I'll actually be helping, on writing some of the code, but it's an opportunity for us to learn some new things and to play around with some new ideas.
Yeah, I guess if you're going to decide as a company, we're going to do Angular or we're going to do Ember, do you really want to do that on a revenue generating thing for the very first time?
Yeah. You want to, you could learn, of course, you could send people to courseworks and they can learn, but there's nothing like actually doing it and testing it in the real world. And when we create these programs, we'll put them in a pilot phase. Sometimes we'll have an idea for a community to use it, and we'll pilot it and see how it works. Works a lot, just like Google Labs and some of the other companies have these labs that they create these ideas and they see how they work. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And now you have a consultancy, so people are, I assume, multidisciplinary. You probably have people that are database people and people who are web people.
Yes.
Do you expect people to know the full stack? I feel like there's a lot of talk right now about we need to make full stack developers, but I don't know about you, but I feel like there's a lot more to know than there was 20 years ago when I started.
There's a huge amount of information to know. And also, things are changing so rapidly. So, as soon as you learn a concept, there's something new to learn. So usually I look for people that know how to learn new technologies. So I'm real big on having a person demonstrate that they can learn a new technology and to articulate how did you learn that technology? What's your approach? Everyone has a different approach. Certainly I want someone with a fundamental background. We tend to work with people in the computer science area, because they have a fundamental conceptual background of the computer sciences. And then, to adopt new technologies is really important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I tend to give talks at conferences and people often assume that I'm somehow an expert. Mm-hmm. And I prefer the term enthusiastic amateur.
Okay.
I can learn something, maybe put a week or two into it and then present certainly on the 101 of said technology, But unfortunately, people will look at me and say, oh, wow, look, how did you become an expert in that so quickly? I'm like, no, anyone should be able to do that.
Yeah.
So when I was the chief architect at my last job, we would have brown bags and we'd assign technologies and you have to go and study it and then come back and talk about it. And a lot of people simply the bring it into your brain, process it, make your analogies and express it is almost impossible. Yeah. Because I don't think it's taught.
It's not taught. And also that's a great approach because teaching someone a concept, is a good way to learn a new concept, just in having to teach other people how to use it. We have some of our developers, of course, they prefer, front end versus back end development. And so generally they work in that space. I do require that people know how things work. That's a fundamental concept that I want everyone to understand how things work. We work in web and mobile space. So how does the internet work? You must understand that in order to work here. And that's because in thinking about, our operations and how we support our clients, we can't support our clients if we don't understand how things work, because when things break, you must be able to fix them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, when I was in school, we learned, fundamentals of TCP/IP and 7-layer topology and things like that. Yeah. But, I don't know where people learn this stuff. Like, I always thought it was fun to telnet into a web server. Yeah. And let's see, type HTTP 1/1, type that yourself at the command and pretend you are a web browser. I think that's like, oh, that's so cool. Yeah, yeah. But I tried that at a code camp with some kids recently and they thought that was pretty stupid. It was like, why are you talking at a low level like this? I thought we were going to learn about how Instagram works.
Yeah, yeah. Because that's the sexy part. The stuff you can see, everyone wants to work there. But again, allowing people to go through the process and to actually experience some of these challenges teaches them why it's important to know these things. So when apps and sites go offline, then it's very important to know some of these concepts if you're going to support those applications. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you said was important, and I agree, is the idea of diverse teams. And the term diversity is often used to express color and gender, but this is about diversity in thought and diversity in role, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Our teams always have a subject matter expert, which, it's usually a non-technical person, that doesn't think very technically, but is an expert on the subject matter. So there's diversity there. For example, we worked on an application that was related to job postings, and one of the team members is a human resource professional. So this person doesn't have a technical knowledge, but they understand how people are recruited for employment, and they were an integral part of that team, and they were involved from the start to the finish. And so teams diversity and roles, diversity and divisions, for example, systems that affect other systems, and having people that are involved on the other end of the spectrum to be involved in the project, whether it's a customer or a client or another division. There's diversity in background, and that includes racial and ethnic and some of these other gender diversity. It's really important as we're thinking about understanding how systems work. Everyone has a different perspective of how a system works based on their involvement in the system. And so that's why it's important to have diversity on teams, because they bring a different perspective, and it prevents working in silos with one type of thinking, one train of thought.
Right. Even also in user experience.
Yes.
Like if everyone in the team is the same age, same gender, all looks the same, they're all going to have their similar backgrounds coloring how they want to interact with that product, however it is.
Yeah, it comes up a lot, particularly in user interface design. We've had younger teams work on projects front end. It looks great. Everyone thinks it looks great. You present it to an older team, and the first thing they say is, "I can't read that." You need to increase the font size. What is this? I can't read that. I can't see it. It's too much information. And so it comes up a lot in user interface theory. It's very important to have diversity, particularly in age and some of these other factors.
One of the other things that I think is interesting is how troubleshooting and problem solving has kind of evolved. I feel like, and I'm dating myself, but I just feel like I'm getting a little bit kind of get off my lawn. But, it was hard. Troubleshooting was hard back in the day. And like, we appreciated a good like CSI type of a story where it's like, I debugged it down to the protocol layer.
Yeah.
A lot of people seem to assume that the internet is a black box, and they reach a certain level and they just think, I guess I can go no farther. I put that byte on the wire and a miracle happened.
Yeah. Troubleshooting, gosh. It's the thing that, no one wants to do, but it's the thing that really makes or breaks a project. And also it's the area that uncovers, when people don't know how things work, you see it really in this area of support and maintenance. If you've ever called, your cable provider to try to get support on your cable service, a lot of times you'll feel it that the person that you're on the phone with, they have no idea how the system works. They cannot help you. They're following a script, and you're not getting anywhere, and it takes you days. So, in terms of troubleshooting, we like to start with the basics. It's basically you have to communicate and understand what the person is trying to accomplish first. And sometimes people skip that step. You'd be amazed at how people just skip the step. What exactly are you trying to do? And, we've had scenarios where people will call and say, I have a problem with this. And you find out that they're not even trying to accomplish what you think they're trying to accomplish. And had you asked that question, you could have just walked them through it, and there's no code to be touched. But when you make assumptions and you don't, follow a systematic method for troubleshooting, you could have a team of 20 engineers, working on something that doesn't need to be fixed, So this happens a lot, but using systematic methods for troubleshooting is extremely important. It's one of my biggest pet peeves, actually.
Yeah, breaking something down, binary searching a problem. People don't think about what that exactly means. The idea and this happened here, and then what happened next. What happened next, yeah. And in terms of thinking about giving people the space to break things, in terms of troubleshooting, that's another area where it's, a good place for people to kind of test when this happens, that happens. When this increases, this decreases. What happens if I turn this off? What happens if I turn this on? What happens if I activate this feature? How does that impact things? And as systems become more complex, in terms of web and mobile systems, we have over 200 types of hybrid development tools. You have, the browser compatibility issues. There's so many layers of things that could go wrong that is really important for people to use systematic approaches as they're troubleshooting. Mm-hmm. One of the stories that a troubleshooting story that I was told was that someone came into a cell phone or a mobile phone person. Came into a sales office and said, I need a bigger antenna. And they were just yelling and screaming. They wanted a bigger antenna, and they would not let that go. They insisted that there's a problem and I need a bigger antenna. Yeah. But it turned out that what they wanted was better reception. Yes. Yeah. And they ended up leaving with a cell phone that had an embedded antenna, no visible antenna at all. Yeah. And you find it a lot. And that goes back to, to the point about sometimes the solution is not writing more code. Another solution, in terms of customers coming with, I need this. Could you enhance the system so that it does this? And not thinking from a systems perspective, you go hammering away writing code. That's exactly how we create these bloated systems, is reacting every time someone makes a request instead of having a conversation regarding the intent and how this impacts the larger system. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I really like the idea that you had of creating a safe place to break stuff. Definitely. That's a really powerful idea. Yeah. And it's really important. And in terms of, there are a lot of movements around getting more underrepresented populations in technology. I think one of the things that would help in that area is exposure. A lot of times people aren't exposed to enough technology. And the reason that exposure is important is, for people that have access to technology, particularly at home, they could play around with things. They break things. They have hobbies. They're constantly, they have side projects. And so it gives them a space to kind of learn through doing. For folks that are not as exposed, they're kind of thrown into the deep end of the pool and they have to play catch up. And so that's why it's very important for us to create these spaces for people to break things, so that they can learn how things work. I was at the Maker Fair here in Portland, and one of the companies here in Oregon that's very well known is the Leatherman Group, right? They make Leatherman tools. Yes. And I'm thinking, why are they here? And what they had done is they went to Goodwill or a thrift store, bought a whole bunch of stuff, DVD players, just a bunch of junk, and they gave everyone a Leatherman tool, and they told all the children to break these things and take them apart.
Yeah.
So you would have, 10-year-olds that had never seen inside of a CD player, opening them up and taking them apart with a Leatherman, and then figuring out, I didn't know that's how it,
Yeah, that's how you learn how things work. That's how I learned, how things work around my house. My husband is the person that, does the electronics and hooks up everything at home. When he's not there, I just start unplugging things. I'm like, okay, if I unplug that cord, then that doesn't work. So let me plug it back in. Let me see what happens here if I push this button. And that's a lot of times that's how things work. Of course, you take it a step further because you want to understand the technology and what, the label and what things are called. But that's exactly how people learn.
Doesn't it seem like if normal people, if non-technical people who aren't like you and I knew that troubleshooting was just unplugging stuff and thinking, like they think that there's a secret. Like every time I leave the country for some trip, that's when something breaks. Like the internet will work for a month. I get on a plane, it's dead the next day. Right? And my wife will call me and she say something in the house is beeping.
That's hysterical.
And I'm like, well, I don't know what you want me to do about that. And then she says, well, how do I fix it? And then I'm literally explaining to her, well, go into each room and listen if you think that thing's beeping. And if you hear something beeping, unplug it and see if it stops beeping.
Yeah.
And
there's no magic.
This is a woman with an MBA, right? She just doesn't have the systems thinking. So she thinks that's amazing. And that's literally all we do. That's all troubleshooting is. Just start flipping switches and drawing conclusions. Yeah, you draw conclusions that, of course, sometimes you draw your conclusions a little quicker than others because of your background and your training. But that's really what it is, at home. They think I'm a genius when the internet goes down, but I'm like unplugging the router, waiting 60 seconds. I plug it back up and I'm like, okay, we're good. And they're like, she fixed it, but, I've learned that pattern works. And, I've spoken to, I've taken it a step further to understand why, when they refresh the IP addresses and everything and how those things work. But it's very important. And I'd love to see more opportunities, in terms of some of these coding events and hackathons for people to do a little more thinking. And there's an opportunity, from a community standpoint for these groups to create community solutions so that you're not just training people to write if then else statements and to use arrays and to write loops, but they're actually thinking about what they're doing, so that they can write meaningful code. And also, another, thought that I had is to actually have challenges so that people can figure out how to write less code. How can you structure your code so that there's less lines of code? That requires a certain level of thinking as well. And that's something that, people don't look into unless you have a performance issue. And then people start looking at the lines of code and the bloat from that perspective. But we could teach some of these things earlier. I think Twitter is a great example of how if you have a great vocabulary, you could tweet something meaningful in 140 characters. And programming could be the same way. If you know the programming syntax and the language, you could write code that doesn't require a huge number of lines of code if you're thinking from a systems perspective. Right. And also understanding the syntax versus understanding the idioms.
Yes.
Like I can make myself understood in Spanish, but I don't have idiomatic Spanish. I can make myself understood in Ruby.
Yes.
But I am in by no means am I an idiomatic Ruby developer.
Yes.
Mine would have more lines of code than is necessary.
Yes, exactly. And so that's important as well. And it's something, it's a step beyond, the thinking, but I think it's something that we can start to think about as we're, engaging some of the prospective professionals in technology.
Well, thanks so much for chatting with me today about systems thinking.
Thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate it.
People can check you out at KISHAU on Twitter and at websmithgroup.com.
Yes.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.